This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo due in Sudan for official visit. Africa to be declared free of wild polio after a 3-decade campaign. And unrest in U.S. state of Wisconsin after a black man is shot multiple times by police. Hello and welcome. You're watching Africa Live. We're coming to you live from Nairobi. I'm Hannah Viviers. Here more stories making headlines this hour. In business, Nigeria's economy contracts by 6%, the lowest in a decade. And in your sport, we check in on Tanzania's efforts to get club football back on track. Well, let's start the hour in Burundi, where at least 15 people have been killed by unknown gunmen. The attack took place in the southern district of Bugarama. Witnesses say armed men attacked the area in Rumonge province, killing several villagers. Others were kidnapped, while some managed to escape. It's reported that the gunmen later engaged security forces in a gun battle that lasted for hours. It is not known whether Burundian soldiers were among the dead. The government official says the attack was most likely linked to the imminent repatriation of Burundian refugees to the country. Burundi has been accusing Rwanda of political interference and sponsoring armed groups. Well, U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo is set to visit Sudan. Pompeo will discuss U.S. support for the transitional government as well as Sudan's growing relations with Israel. The U.S. Secretary of State is currently on a tour of the Middle East. Starting in Israel, Pompeo will also visit Bahrain and the UAE. Sudanese officials will look to discuss removing the country from the Washington's terrorism list. Sudan is currently on the U.S. state of sponsors of terrorism list. Let's cross over now to CGTN's Patrick Ayet in neighboring South Sudan. Patrick, thank you so much for joining us. Patrick, give us more detail on that visit to Khartoum by Mike Pompeo. What is on the agenda?
Yes, Hannah, the U.S. Secretary of State is expected to land any moment from now in Khartoum. Of course, the schedule is that he's supposed to land at 10 GMT. So that's why I'm saying any moment now he will be landing. He's expected, therefore, to head straight to meet with the Sudan's Prime Minister, Hamdok. Thereafter, he is scheduled to go and meet the chair of the Sovereign Council of Sudan, that is Al-Burhan. And then also he is scheduled to meet other political actors in the Sudan to try to discuss one issue, is that the issue of supporting the civilian rule in the Sudan. If you've been following the events in the Sudan now, you know that the government is a mixture of the military and the civilians. Elections are scheduled to take place in 2022. So the U.S. says it supports return to civilian rule. That means everything possible has to be done to ensure that by 2022 elections take place and a pure civilian rule is restored. Another issue that you already even mentioned is the issue of relationship between Sudan and Israel. For some of us who have had the chance to hold Sudan's passport, in the Sudan's passport is written that you can visit any country except Israel. So the relationship between Sudan and Israel has been bad. Now the U.S. wants, of course, to ensure that that relationship is improved, things get better between Israel and Sudan. Well, of course, we expect the Sudan's government to insist on, of course, being removed from the list of sponsors of terrorism. So that is basically what the agenda is all about. But this visit is being seen as very important by many people because this is actually indicates for the first time that a senior U.S. official is coming to Sudan. Since the sanction in 1993, no senior U.S. government official has come to Sudan. So this is a very, very important milestone for the Sudanese people, Hannah.
Patrick, let's just zoom in on the U.S. being keen to have Arab nations like Sudan normalize ties with Israel, and you've mentioned a little bit about that. However, we are hearing that there are some parties in Khartoum, Patrick, that are rejecting normalizing ties with Israel. Can you tell us any more about that?
Yeah. There is no doubt that in the Sudan up to now, there are still extremist groups. If you remember, there have been even attempts on the life of the current prime minister where his convoy was attacked. This, of course, the Sudanese authorities are saying have been done by the extremist groups. So definitely, if you see, since independence of Sudan, there has been poor relationship between Sudan and Israel. This is because of the conflict between, of course, Israel and its neighbors, and you find that people in Sudan are divided or because of this conflict. Many people in the Sudan look at themselves as pro-Arab, and they have supposed to support Islamic states and not to normalize ties with Israel. So definitely there's going to be a lot of pulling ropes here and there. Last week when the spokesperson of the Foreign Affairs announced that they are looking for a way of a peaceful settlement or a peaceful coexistence with Israel, he was fired by the foreign minister. So that tells you of the kind of division that people have about the issue of Israel. But the issue here is that that the U.S. is going to use that as a bargaining tool to ensure that Sudan is removed from the terrorists or the list of countries that sponsor terrorism. So the government may fear that, yes, there are people who are against the move, but because of them wanting to be removed from the terrorist list, they have to accept that, because this is the global trend now. You have nothing to do. If you want the economy to improve, remember former President Omar al-Bashir was overthrown because of hard economic situation. If you want this economic situation to improve, to have better life, then you have to go by these kind of conditions to ensure that the country benefits. Hannah.
Thank you so much for that, Patrick. We're going to stay with that story now. That was Patrick here speaking to us from South Sudan, just speaking to us about that visit for the U.S. Secretary of State visiting Sudan. Well, let's stay with that story. We're moving now to Ethiopia, where Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed is also scheduled to arrive in Khartoum for a one-day visit. Let's cross over to Addis Ababa, where Gurum Chala is standing by. Gurum, thank you so much for joining us. Tell us more about the Prime Minister's visit to Sudan, seeing that it coincides with U.S. Secretary of State Pompeo's visit there.
Well, as you've said, Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed is visiting Sudan. By the way, at the moment, he has already arrived in Khartoum and was welcomed by his Sudanese counterpart, Prime Minister Abdullah Hamdok himself. Now, the priority, and this is according to the press secretariat of the Prime Minister of Ethiopia, the priority of his visit there is to conduct bilateral discussions between his administration and that of Sudan. As you might understand, there are trade relations between Ethiopia and Sudan, and also there are also security issues these nations need to address, more particularly on the long unresolved border problems between Sudan and Ethiopia. Apart from these discussions, there is also the strengthening of the situation in Sudan. Since the transitional government took power and since Prime Minister Abdullah Hamdok came to power with the facilitation of Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed himself almost last year, the two parties need to discuss how they can sustain peace in Sudan and also head towards the election in that country. Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed is also expected to meet, once he is in Khartoum, with Abdul Fattah al-Burhan, the head of the Transitional Council of Sudan himself. And their discussion will also revolve more or less around the same issues with the Prime Minister Abdullah Hamdok himself. Now that Michael Pompeo, U.S. Secretary of State, is going to be in Sudan, Hannah, we are also expecting Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed to have a word with him, perhaps on the current situation in Ethiopia when it comes to peace and security issues, people who are in prison, the election that should be coming up sooner than later in this country, among other issues. So there are so many agenda items on the table of the Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed once he is in Khartoum. We have heard it's just a one-day visit, but there are lots of things that he should be covering while he is in Khartoum, Hannah.
Thank you so much, Gurum, and we know that you're going to be keeping a tab for us on Ethiopia's involvement there. Thank you so much, Gurum Chala, joining us live from Addis Ababa. Well, let's now head over to Mali, where the West African Regional Bloc, ECOWAS, has been forced to go back to the drawing board. An ECOWAS delegation failed to reach an agreement with the military junta on a transition back to civilian rule. A junta spokesperson said the final decision on an interim administration would be decided by Malians. ECOWAS has threatened sanctions on Mali following a military coup last week. ECOWAS negotiators had hoped for the reinstatement of ousted President Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta, but sources say the focus of the talks shifted due to the popularity of the coup within Mali. There are reports that Keïta said he did not wish to return to office. Coup leaders promised that Keïta would be allowed to live in the country and travel as he wished. Well, CGTN's Phil Ihazana joins us from Abuja with the latest on efforts to resolve the deadlock in Mali. Phil, thank you so much for joining us. So what next for Mali, Phil, and ECOWAS following this latest stalemate that we're hearing about now?
Oh, thank you. So what we know is that the mediation team would have to present its report to the heads of state of the 15-member bloc, which is ECOWAS, at a summit which is built to occur later this week. And we're expecting that more details will be presented to the heads of state, where a decision, a very strong decision, will have to be made by the entire body. And most likely another delegation will have to be sent again to Mali to further advanced talks on progress to be made. Of course, the head of the mediation team, which is former President Goodluck Jonathan, stated that a lot of issues have been discussed, but decisions have not been made so far on both sides. The mediation team and, of course, the military junta have a lot to chew on in the next few days. The military junta insisting on holding on to power for a few years before proper elections are held, but of course that will not is not something the ECOWAS would want to agree on. So we're going to be seeing pressure put on the military junta to allow a transitional government come in place and of course conduct an election. We also know that the ousted president Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta is saying he's not interested in ruling the nation anymore. He just wants to see a quick transition of government that will allow elections hold. And so all of this is what both sides, the mediation team and the military junta, will have to, look at in the next few days. And then, of course, the ECOWAS team would also update on whether or not to force the military junta to ensure a transitional government comes in place or continue on possible peace talks for a truce.
Thank you so much, Philly Haza there, joining us live and speaking to us about that ongoing situation in Mali. We'll move over to Libya now, where the Libyan National Army has dismissed a ceasefire announced by the Government of National Accord and the eastern-based Libyan parliament. The LNA describes the move as a stunt by the GNA, which it claims is building up forces to attack the city of Sirte. CGTN's Adel El Marouchi has the details.
The eastern-based Libyan National Army has finally broken its silence regarding Libya's newest ceasefire declaration. In a press conference on Sunday, the spokesman of the LNA forces claims that the Government of National Accord and Turkey have been building up ground and naval forces on the outskirts of Sirte.
This ceasefire is made to deceive everyone. Our grounded air surveillance confirms the intentions of our enemies to attack our forces in Sirte and Al Jufra. Any aggression will be faced by brutal force. Our entire armed forces are ready for combat. They will stand against any attempt to step forward towards Sirte.
The LNA has spotted 2 Turkish frigates near Sirte in the Mediterranean, along with other naval units, which does not suggest an offensive threat from the side against Sirte. If that happens, access to the oil fields would be easier for them.
El-Mismari's remarks increase concerns about the LNA's commitment to Friday's ceasefire announcement. When Aqila Saleh, the Speaker of the Eastern-based Parliament, made the announcement, there was no sign that the LNA commander Khalifa Haftar had backed it. In recent months, Haftar's political influence has been diminishing compared to that of Saleh, who is increasingly being seen as an advocate for a political solution, with regional and international powers endorsing his negotiation plans.
Khalifa Haftar is a military leader. He is not in a strong political role anymore. He is a representative of the Libyan army and therefore will be mainly involved in issues that concern the mobilization of his army. He will remain to be effective in military and security tracks, but not in politics.
In his ceasefire announcement, Al-Sarraj called for the demilitarization of Sirte and Al-Jufra. The LNA forces have refused to retreat from these strategic areas. The LNA has neither announced its commitment to the ceasefire nor has it confirmed breaching it. But its dismissal to the GNA's intention adds to the uncertainty that surrounds the success of this newest call to halt all sorts of aggressions in Libya. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
It's time now for us to take a short break and return. More news, including Africa to be declared free of wild polio after a 3-decade campaign, and unrest in U.S. state of Wisconsin after a black man is shot multiple times by police.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there to see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference.
Welcome back. You're watching News Making Headlines right here on Africa Live. Well, Africa is set to cross a major health milestone. The World Health Organization will certify Africa free from wild polio. The virus attacks the spinal cord, causing irreversible paralysis in children. The last case recorded on the continent was 4 years ago in Nigeria. Medical experts say immunization campaigns and community outreach programs helped stop the spread of the disease in Africa. So far, only Afghanistan and Pakistan recorded cases of wild polio virus this year.
We still need to maintain the tempo so that we don't have importation. Wild polio virus is still in Afghanistan, it's still in Pakistan. There's movement every day. If we don't tighten our belts or redouble our efforts, we can have importation, and then we'll start from square one again.
Well, to discuss this further, we're now joined by Dr. Pascal Mkanda. He is the World Health Organization's Polio Eradication Program Coordinator for the Africa region. Thank you so much for joining us, Doctor. Doctor, what does a wild polio-free Africa imply for the continent, and does it mean all polio is now over?
So, first of all, this is quite a historic day for Africa. In that we are indeed celebrating the certification of wild polio-free status. But in addition to wild polio virus, there are other forms of polio, like we call the circulating vaccine-derived polio viruses, which are very, very rare due to a mutation of the vaccine.
Doctor, fighting polio in Nigeria has particularly been a challenge, and we just reported that in our previous story. What would it take to keep that country and the rest of Africa as a whole free from all forms of polio?
So what that will require is to have a very good surveillance in the first place, to know if there's any transmission or importation of wild polio viruses from other countries which are still endemic of wild polio viruses. But at the same time, we also have to increase immunization coverage. We still have to vaccinate children so that all forms of polio, including circulating vaccine-derived polioviruses, are all stopped. So it will require really intensifying surveillance now, as well as really strengthening routine immunization services delivery in the countries.
So now, from what I was from what we've been told is that there's still the issue of vaccine-derived poliovirus outbreaks. Where are we in the fight against that?
So they are in 16 countries, or these CVDPVs, and they range from countries in the central part of Africa as well as the western part of Africa. So it's not just like one country, but it's a group of countries where we're having these. And these are the countries where the coverages of routine immunization have not been very, very good for quite a number of years. The most important thing is that because we have been able to stop wild poliovirus, which is even more complex and more virulent, we have the vaccine, we have the know-how to really stop even these circulating vaccine-derived vaccine-derived polioviruses if they emerge anywhere in the African region.
Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Pascal Mkanda. He is the World Health Organization's Polio Eradication Program Coordinator for the African region. Well, polio, as we reported earlier, is a viral disease. It's transmitted from person to person. Transmission mainly occurs through the fecal-oral route and at times through water or food. While there is no cure for polio, the disease is said to be prevented with a vaccine. On top of routine vaccination for children, many nations have carried out mass immunization campaigns. Well, millions of South African children are back in class 5 months after schools shut due to the coronavirus. They joined their peers in grades 7 and 12 who returned to school 2 months ago. But as CGTN's Julie Shire reports, there are concerns over the rising death toll from COVID-19 despite slowing infections.
Things are slightly different for millions of South African children returning to school. Except for grades 7 and 12, the rest of the learners have lost close to half the year because of the coronavirus pandemic. Johannesburg's Highlands North Boys High School has so far been COVID-19 free.
It's COVID-19 now, which requires a lot of arrangements and a lot of preparations. So as a school, we work together with SGB, school management team and educators, also a ground staff. So we come here every day in the morning, 7 a.m., and we make sure that they sign, they take temperatures, social distancing, and we also make sure that we do orientation.
It's very difficult, and especially for our young ones, especially the grade 8, 9, and 10, because remember they're still in that adolescent stage. So they think life is normal, like normal before the pandemic. But with the senior ones, grade 11s and 12, it's much better because most of them, they know the reason why they come into school.
Easing of lockdown restrictions has allowed educators to slowly restore the academic calendar, but learners and teachers have their work cut out for them.
We're going to start from the scratch, especially when we do the assessment. It's going to be difficult for us. For a learner to pass, it means a teacher must pull up his or her socks. I don't know how high. We're going to make it as life is normal, as like before, because we cannot say we're going to be too lenient or whatever. As I've told the boys that there is no pass one, pass all.
In keeping with physical distancing measures, grades will be rotated on a weekly basis.
This week, the week of the 24th, we've got our grade 12, we've got our grade 9 and our grade 10. Next week, it will be grade 12 again, and then grade 11 and grade 8. So they rotate like that. And then those who are at home, we give them work, we engage them in work for the whole week. So that we can have plus or minus 400 learners in a school, so that we can be able to deal with social distancing.
Educators have a tough job on their hands. They will have to ensure they cover critical subject matter over the next few months while keeping learners safe and preparing them to sit their year-end exams. Julie Shara, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
Access to water is a key part of preventing and controlling infectious diseases. In Kenya, there are concerns that coronavirus may spread in rural communities with water-stressed environments. Daniel Arab Moy reports from Turkana, one of Kenya's driest counties.
Many Kenyans rely on hand washing as one of the cheapest ways to keep the coronavirus at bay. But in the water-scarce county of Turkana, not everyone has access to safe and clean water.
It's been almost 2 years and we still don't have water. For now, we rely on the river. If the water level decreases, we dig through the sand and collect drinking water.
Here in Kawales, we have a very serious water problem ever since our water pipe broke down. It's now like 1.5 years and we still don't have water.
A report last year by UNICEF found that less than 60% of Kenyans have access to basic water services. While regular hand washing may seem like the easiest precautionary measure against the coronavirus pandemic, water can be hard to come by, especially among rural communities in Africa. Despite the challenges, authorities say they are making efforts to ensure rural communities have regular access to clean running water as a measure to protect communities against coronavirus.
We have increased water resources in quite a significant area. I don't want to say that we have solved all the water problems. Those problems are still there, but it's a struggle.
Right now we are a bit lucky because it's raining, so there is water in some areas. But there are these other areas that are persistent and don't have water, so we have to ensure that there is what we call water tracking. So we have some trucks that we fill and then ensure that this water reaches some of the areas.
While some can afford to pay for alternative water supplies to drink, wash, and fend against COVID-19, the question is, how about those who cannot? Daniel Arab Moi, CGTN, Lodwar, Kenya.
Well, let's now look at top stories from outside the continent. We begin in South Korea, where despite early victories against the coronavirus, officials are now warning that there could be a nationwide outbreak there. The country reported 280 new cases on Monday, continuing a trend of triple-digit increases. And there are concerns that hospitals may be overwhelmed. Jack Barton reports from Seoul.
I'm standing outside one of the major hospitals right now, and what they're saying is the situation is currently under control. They don't have any sort of massive bed shortage, though a few hospitals are reaching their peak capacity, one of them up around 97% in terms of the beds set aside for COVID-19 patients. However, if the situation doesn't retreat, even if it just stays where it is with 200 to 300 infections a day, the hospital or the health ministry here is warning the situation could become very dire. At the moment, they're scrambling to reopen centres that they had in May and also to create more beds in other areas. They're looking at 2,000 extra beds in the coming week at some community centres. But doctors and even the healthcare ministry is saying that, there's no substitute for hospitals. It would be good if they can come up with some program to extend the bed capacity. The other problem they have, though, is a strike by young doctors, and the government has been trying to compel them to go back to work. They don't like the government's new scheme to increase the number of new medical students. There's one just off camera, actually, just picketing over there, but down in the lobby of this hospital, there's a whole group of medical students in there picketing and refusing to go back to work. The government's saying this is also a big problem. They need all hands on deck at the moment. So even if those beds begin to fill up, there might be a shortage of doctors who can actually tend to the patients who are in them.
Let's move over to the U.S. now, where in the state of Wisconsin, a new uproar over an all too familiar occurrence. A 29-year-old black man is in serious condition after police shot him multiple times in the back on Sunday. Dan Williams has more, but please be warned, his report contains graphic content.
A mattress lies at the scene of the latest shooting of an African-American man at the hands of police officers. In video footage posted online, Jacob Blake was seen walking to his vehicle, followed by two Kenosha, Wisconsin police officers, guns drawn. As he entered the driver's side door, he was shot in the back, at least 7 shots heard. A family attorney says Blake's children were in the car. Police had responded to a domestic incident that witnesses say did not directly involve Blake. The shooting sparked a night of protest in Kenosha. A car dealership was torched. Vehicles near the courthouse were also set on fire. Aaron Campazano lives across the road from where the shooting took place.
That is definitely not how it should have, been handled. There was 3 gentlemen who were well-trained police officers, who should have been well-trained police officers who deal with scenarios like this. They should have dealt with it 100% differently than that. more than definitely not 7 shots to the gentleman's back while getting in his car.
Monday, around 24 Black Lives Matter protesters again gathered at the spot of the shooting and then marched to the courthouse. The outrage seen here is reminiscent of that seen in neighboring Minnesota in May after the death of George Floyd. Floyd was killed after a police officer knelt on his neck for almost 9 minutes, sparking global outrage. Activists say this shooting once again underlines the issues of police brutality and racial justice.
And it always comes back to this: hands up, don't shoot. That's what we do. Hands up, don't shoot. But does it matter? No, because it doesn't get there. We still get shot. Just like this young man over here, he got shot. And where is he? In the hospital, because the police want to use excessive force. If you don't get it, shut it down.
Wisconsin's Governor Tony Evers condemned the shooting and ordered the deployment of National Guard troops amid the unrest. But protesters here say they will continue to demonstrate until justice for Blake has been achieved. Dan Williams for CGTN, Kenosha, Wisconsin.
The business news after a short break. Here's what's coming up. Nigeria's economy contracts by 6%, the lowest in a decade. And China and the United States to push through with a multi-billion-dollar Phase 1 trade deal.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Time now for the business news. French oil major Total has signed a security pact with the Mozambican government to protect a $20 billion natural gas project being developed there. Mozambican security forces have been battling a low-level insurgency against militia in the gas-rich north of the country. The militia are suspected of having links to Islamic State. Earlier this month, insurgents captured a heavily defended port in the far northern town of Motimboa da Praia. Total's project includes the development of the Golfinho and Atum natural gas fields in the offshore Area 1 concession. The fields contain more than 60 trillion cubic feet of gas. The project also includes the construction of a liquefaction plant with a capacity of 13.1 million tons per annum. Initial production is slated for 2024. Nigeria's economy contracted the most in at least a decade in the second quarter of 2020. The decline was due to a contraction in domestic and international economic activity due to the pandemic. GDP shrank by 6.1% in the 3 months through June. Oil production also fell to 1.8 million barrels a day from 2 million barrels in Q1. That's the lowest since the first quarter of 2017, which was the last time Africa's largest economy contracted. The drop in output, however, was wider than just crude. Nigeria's biggest revenue earner, oil sector, recorded 6.6% year-on-year contraction in Q2. Similarly, the non-oil sector shrank by just over 6%. That's the first decline in non-oil GDP growth rate since the third quarter of 2017. Meanwhile, in Zambia, President Edgar Lungu has sacked the central bank governor, Denny Kalyalia, and replaced him with a former deputy finance minister, Christopher Mpanza Mvongo. Kalyalia, who previously served as a World Bank executive director, was appointed in February of 2015 and had his contract extended in 2018 until 2023. His dismissal comes barely 3 days after the central bank cut its benchmark lending rate by 125 basis points to 8%. This was in an effort to safeguard financial sector stability and protect livelihoods in the wake of the pandemic. The appointment of Mvunga, who was serving as Deputy Secretary to the Cabinet in the Finance and Economic Development Unit, is subject to ratification by Parliament. Well, Tunisia's unemployment rate hit 18% in the second quarter of 2020. The estimated number of unemployed people reached almost 800,000. That's compared to 600,000 in the first quarter after the COVID-19 pandemic took a toll on that economy. Here's CGTN's Adnan Shuashi with more.
Tunisian authorities assert that the high unemployment rate is a result of the social and economic impact of the COVID-19 crisis on the active population in the country. Data from the National Institute of Statistics in Tunisia showed unemployment rate has risen significantly in the second quarter of 2020 to 746,000 people.
The coronavirus pandemic surprised us. It created an unexpected crisis and left a large number of people unemployed. It's a shock for the economic and social fabric, which deepened the state's difficulties and imposed a new reality onto the government.
Thousands of unemployed graduates have been demonstrating in many regions. Some of these graduates have been unemployed for years. The COVID-19 crisis has only complicated the situation. In fact, the number of unemployed higher education graduates is estimated on average at 286,000 in the second quarter of 2020, compared to 258,000 in the first 6 months of the year.
It's unacceptable that university graduates who spend years studying do not get the chance to work in any company or state institution. We've been neglected by the successive governments.
The state wants to get rid of us. Creating jobs is the state's responsibility. The COVID-19 crisis is not the main reason for unemployment. We've been unemployed since 2011. The crisis has only exacerbated the mismanagement, incompetence, and absence of concrete solutions.
Over 5,000 PhD holders from different specialties have staged sit-ins to shed light on their precarious situation, which is expected to worsen because the government has put direct hold on civil service employment for the next 2 years.
The post-COVID-19 period is supposed to be an era of scientific research and opportunities for researchers and PhD holders. The unemployment rate has reached alarming levels. The situation will not improve because the worst is yet to come.
The Ministry of Social Affairs says Tunisia's youth unemployment rate is 36.1%. This rate is estimated at 36% for men and 37.3% for women. According to the National Institute of Statistics, over 200,000 people have lost their jobs in the industry, agriculture, service, tourism and construction sectors since the outbreak of the coronavirus crisis. Experts assert that this number is expected to rise in the next 3 months. Adnan Shawashi, CGTN, Tunis.
Egypt is set to boost its water production capacity with the addition of 19 new desalination plants over a period of 18 months. The desalination plants are worth about $690 million and will have a total daily production of 550 cubic meters. From 550,000 cubic meters, that is. From Cairo, here's CGTN's Yasser Akim with the details.
Egypt's annual water share from the Nile has been stagnant for decades and will remain so. But the population has been growing rapidly, making it impossible to sustain demand for water, and the effects could be devastating. About 200,000 acres of agricultural land could be damaged, putting a huge burden on the economy. Over 1 million farmers could also lose their sources of living. That's in addition to the lack of drinking water for a majority of Egyptians. Hence, the government's ambitious plan to create new sources of water.
Egypt in need for additional water resources. Therefore, the government has decided that all coastal cities are going to depend on desalination from now on, and that this will require expansion in desalination plants. It's mainly for cities and mainly for domestic use, because of course for agriculture it's going to be very, very expensive. Agriculture uses a lot of water, so it is mainly intended for domestic use.
The total cost of the projects is about $60 billion. Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi has just approved a $30 billion that will be released for the first phase.
Desalination is going to reach maybe about 1.5 billion cubic meters per year of desalinated water production. These efforts are going to, of course, help as much as possible in providing the essential needs as the water demand increase from one year to another.
To avoid water waste by Egyptians, Parliament has amended a law allowing tougher punishment for wasting water. Farmers are being taught new irrigation systems to conserve water, and the government is reducing the cultivation of high water consuming crops like rice.
Desalination projects are very important because now we have other means to get water. As for citizens, we should refrain from wasting water because this will harm us now and the future generations.
With the constantly growing population that has surpassed 100 million, this plan is long-term. It's expected to last until the year 2035. Yes, Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
And now for a look at trade tensions between Beijing and Washington. Xinhua news agency reports that U.S. and Chinese negotiators discussed strengthening coordination of their country's economic policies during a phone call today. Xinhua reported that Chinese Vice Premier Liu He, U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer, and U.S. Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin conducted a constructive dialogue concerning the Phase 1 trade deal during the call. According to Xinhua, the officials also agreed to promote the implementation of the agreement reached in January after a 2-year trade war. TikTok has filed a lawsuit against the Trump administration over an executive order banning any American transactions with its parent company, ByteDance. TikTok says in the federal suit filed Monday in California that its app does not pose a national security threat and calls the ban unfair and illegal. Edis Tiensen reports.
The popular video app TikTok has officially filed a lawsuit in federal court challenging the executive orders issued by President Donald Trump earlier this month. He'd used his emergency economic powers to issue an initial order that bans the app from doing transactions in the country within 45 days, a move that could essentially take away much of the advertising revenue generated here in the U.S. And a second executive order gave ByteDance internet company 90 days to divest from its American assets and any data that TikTok had gathered in the U.S. Analysts say TikTok's challenging the first order on commercial grounds.
My understanding, the first, which is what a lot of the court attention is about today, can actually be appealed in court, and that's what TikTok is doing, what ByteDance is doing, to perhaps buy a little bit of time or delay and perhaps preserve some value in the sale. The second, though, I don't believe can be challenged. So they're both quite serious to experience, basically, but they're both different.
President Donald Trump has repeatedly argued that the app poses a national security threat because of its Chinese ties. But TikTok has said that it had taken extraordinary measures to protect user privacy and data by storing all of its data outside of China on servers here in the United States and Singapore. They also argued that the Trump administration had failed to follow due process, provide any evidence that TikTok was an actual threat, nor justification for its punitive actions. The Chinese Foreign Ministry has also issued a response.
China supports the relevant companies in taking up legal weapons to safeguard their rights and interests, and will continue to take all necessary measures to resolutely safeguard the legitimate rights and interests of Chinese companies.
Analysts are saying that it's not very usual to see emergency economic powers to be used against a technology giant. And some are saying this may have been influenced by political motivations given how much Trump has escalated the political rhetoric against China during his re-election campaign. It is Tianshan, CGTN, Los Angeles.
Well, after the break, we'll be bringing you a visual spectacle. Here's a highlight. We get up close with some of the big 5 game animals at the Mara in our digital safari.
Join us in global business and see Africa through our eyes. The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Panata, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
And as promised, a visual spectacle coming up. We go to our continued look at the wildebeest migration in Kenya. Today we get up close with some of the big 5 game animals in the Masai Mara.
Yesterday on CGTN's Digital Safari, on a cold and breezy morning in the Masai Mara, an assortment of nearby animals were making their way down to the river. Although leisurely in their stroll down to the water's edge, the prospect of crossing largely loomed in their minds. Down in Pinda, the big cats were still waking up from their peaceful sleep. Warming their bodies in the morning sun and getting ready for the day's activities. A large white rhino bull was out patrolling his territory, with his tail curled up and his eyes fixed on the horizon. This rhino meant business. The elephants in Pridelands took full advantage of finding a waterhole all to themselves. Mud bathing, splashing and drinking. Their playful demeanor was on full display. The hefty herbivores were out and about all over the southern African parks. Steve got up close and personal with a large herd of buffalo in Juma. These aggressive bulldozers seemed tranquil amongst their companions in the bush. We joined Dylan in Swalu as he came upon an African wildcat patiently stalking its breakfast. Despite spending most of the morning waiting for the cat to strike, our hopes did not materialize as the unlucky cat skulked away without reward. Later that morning, the mounting pressure to cross the mighty Mara almost reached boiling point. A herd of zebra contemplated crossing the dangerous waterway. But after reassessing the situation, they thought perhaps tomorrow would be more sensible. Join us every day at 4:30 GMT on CGTN digital platforms for your very own virtual safari through the African wild.
Well, it's time now for us to take a short break and return. Your sport action, including we check in on Tanzania's efforts to get club football back on track.
How would you create your legend? On the fields, on the tracks, in the arenas of Africa. Were you born to be a player? Could this moment be yours? Sports Scene. Find your game.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Well, let's take a look at what's happening in the world of sport. We begin in Tanzania, which was the first African country to resume post-COVID-19 football, with Simba SC winning the league and cup double. The country managed to conclude the disrupted 2019-2020 season despite the East African region registering increasing cases of the coronavirus. Isaac Lukanda reports.
On the 2nd of August, Tanzanian giants Simba Sports Club celebrated clinching a domestic double. At the time, many countries in Africa were still under lockdown and other COVID-19 restrictions.
The country's leaders said no. This is a problem that is perhaps rooted in perception, that life can continue as we combat this disease, just as we combat other diseases we live with. So it was not an easy decision, and you will note that when we started, people were a bit fearful of going to stadiums, despite the social distancing measures that were put in place.
The government announced that leagues in the country would resume on the 1st of June following its claim of a significant reduction in coronavirus cases. Players and fans were subjected to strict guidelines and safety regulations during matches. Saving the income of footballers was one of the main reasons given for the resumption.
The United Nations estimates that millions of jobs could be lost from the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic on the sporting industry. To cushion its members from the adverse effects of COVID-19, the World Football Governing Body FIFA has granted $1 million each to football federations around the world, including those in Tanzania, Uganda, and Kenya.
Citing the possibility of a resurgence of coronavirus cases, some critics in and outside the country denounced Tanzania's move to resume the league as reckless, but many fans welcomed the decision.
I was worried. How could we be the first to reopen? But when it resumed and things went well, our league became one of our identities. Our country has been recognized through this.
The guidelines put in place were good. As fans, we would sit 1 meter apart, so I was happy about that, and the number of fans in attendance was also reduced.
As the Tanzanian Premier League prepares to enter yet another season, its experience of resuming football amidst the COVID-19 pandemic may just offer a roadmap to other nations seeking to resume their leagues. Isaac Lukando, CGTN, Dar es Salaam.
In Germany, Bayern Munich's victorious